Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Something to Talk About Live. My name is Liz Owen. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Director of Communications at PFLAG National. It's great to have you with us again for another episode. As always, I am joined by my friend and colleague, our Director of Learning and Inclusion, Jean Marie Navetta.
Liz Owen, hello.
How are you?
I am doing well. I'm doing well because I'm very excited about today's show. I'm excited about every show, but I'm especially excited today because of our guest. And then we have some really exciting stuff to tell people about. So we need to get to work.
I'm going to be the hasty retreat. Have fun.
See you later, Liz. Hey, everybody. My name is Jean Marie Navetta. I'm the Director of Learning and Inclusion at PFLAG National, and my pronouns are she and ella. Every single week, we get together to talk about something related to LGBTQ equality. And this week, we're talking about Florida, and we're talking about some of the stuff that's happening there, but certainly not limited to Florida. So for those of you who would like to read this week's article, it was from NBC News done by Jo Yurcaba, and the title was Chasten Buttigieg says that Florida's Don't Say Gay bill will push kids back into the closet. We also have a couple of really good bonus reads on this for you, including one from the fantastic LZ Granderson. So I encourage you to go to straightforequality.org/discussion series to get both the article and the discussion questions. So if you want to have this conversation at work or at home, you can do that. But the conversation here is going to be happening with one of the fiercest people in the LGBTQ movement ever, my colleague Nadine Smith, who is the Executive Director of Equality Florida. So I'd love to welcome Nadine in now. Hey, Nadine.
Hello.
Thank you so much for being with us. You are a woman in deep demand all the time, so I appreciate the time.
Oh, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be here, and there's a lot cooking, and while it's happening in Florida, it is something that everyone, anywhere in the country, is going to want to hear about.
Yeah, and that's really what I want to talk about. So first, can we start with Florida and talk a little bit about what's been going on there? So obviously, the articles have been dealing largely with the Don't Say Gay bill, but this is certainly not the only piece of anti-LGBTQ legislation that you've been contending with in the state.
Yeah.
So can you give people an idea of what the landscape has been like for the last couple of years?
Sure. Well, the most important thing for everyone to understand is Florida is home to two people who very much want to be the next Republican nominee for president. One of them lives in Mar-a-Lago as the defeated former president, Donald Trump. And the other one is the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis. And the reason I say you've got to know that is because it explains why the legislative agenda in Tallahassee has nothing whatsoever to do with the daily lives and safety and economic health of our state. And they have everything to do with Ron DeSantis working to position himself to the right of Donald Trump in order to secure the Republican nomination for president. And so what had been happening in the background, Trump and DeSantis sort of jockeying for position and sniping at each other, has spilled out into the public, where you see Trump calling DeSantis gutless, and you see DeSantis criticizing Trump for even, the most modest efforts around COVID. And so this legislative agenda that we're facing in Tallahassee last year and now this year has really been an agenda of censorship, of surveillance and control intended to appeal to a slice of the Republican primary voter that DeSantis is trying to peel away from Donald Trump. So as a consequence, we have the Don't Say Gay bill, which basically tells teachers that you cannot permit any discussion of sexual orientation or gender identity in your classrooms. You have the Stop Woke bill, which is they call the critical race theory bill, but really what it does is it stands for, and this is a pretty tortured acronym, Stop Traumatizing Our Kids and Employees, right? Like Stop Woke. Anybody try to make sense of it, but it not only begins to, it creates a cause of action so that an employee who maybe is offended because the company had sexual harassment training and he feels personally attacked can file a lawsuit. It is intended to say there are portions of American history that speak honestly about race that are not permitted to be discussed anymore if it will make primarily white people uncomfortable. So at a time when we ought to be dealing honestly with our history of race in America and the ongoing injustices that emanate from that history, Ron DeSantis has taken a path that says, no, I want to make sure my base, the voters that I'm counting on, are never put in any position where they feel an uncomfortable need to confront our nation's past and present.
That sort of brings up something that I wanted to talk about later on, but I think that you just perfectly queued up the conversation, which is, LGBTQ issues for a very long time were seen as an incredibly effective wedge issue when it came to voting time. And then it seemed like they sort of got neutralized for a bit. Gay people got married, the sky didn't fall. It wasn't the same wedge that it was. Are you seeing a comeback of queer lives as wedge issue across the board now?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that, in particular, trans people's lives are being attacked in multiple ways, especially trans kids. And, in using this, they've had to shift some of their language because where the American people are has shifted. But I think that in targeting the trans community, they not only are directly harming real people, they're also softening the ground for all of us as targets. And so it's not an accident that if you look at the totality of this censorship and surveillance and control agenda, it doesn't limit itself to attacks on the LGBT community. It doesn't limit itself to trying to erase from our curriculum honest conversations about race, the honest inclusion of LGBT, the existence of LGBTQ people. You're seeing a 15-week abortion ban. You're seeing the government intrude in the most, in every aspect of our lives. You have a governor who says teachers ought to be, every classroom should be put under surveillance so that we can monitor anything a teacher says to a student. And none of it should ever be in regard to sexual orientation or gender identity. So it's a very, their ability and willingness to do harm is intersectional, and our response has to be as well, which means we have to be as aggressive in pushing back against this racist agenda to appeal to white fragility. We have to be just as aggressive in standing up to the ability for people to determine for themselves if and when to become parents. And we have to move the conversation beyond abortion and talk about the reality that, Black women in seeking reproductive options are often, are too frequently dying in the process of childbirth, have limited access to so many aspects of that. And so I think that really what this moment calls for is a collective vision of America moving forward. I'll just, in 2015, I was part of something called Leadership Florida, and it's where mostly business people and a few nonprofits. It's this thing that began with the Florida Chamber, so it tends to be fairly conservative, and then a few of us sneak in the door. And I remember it was the last gathering, and they said our final speaker was going to be this demographer from North Carolina, Professor Johnson, and he was an older Black man. And I remember thinking, I've had lunch, I'm exhausted, I'm going to play Words with Friends in the back because demographics. And then he said, our nation is in the midst of a massive demographic turmoil that is going to shake every system, political, social, and economic. And he said it's the collision of two demographic realities, which is the browning of America and the graying of America. And because of racial inequities, the graying of America is overwhelmingly, white people statistically outlive other races because of racial healthcare inequities. And so you have a population that has more wealth, more political power, votes more often, et cetera. And then you have an emerging demographic that is much more diverse, looks much more like, the classroom your kids are in, the workplace that you are in, the cities that you hang out in. And this is the two Americas. And one of them is terribly fearful of the America that is emerging. And and I remember because it was 2015, and this was at a moment when Trump was considered a bit of a punchline, and he basically said, and this is why Donald Trump is going to win, because he understands the fear,
Wow.
whether they can articulate it or not, of the graying of America, and you can disagree with it, you can be offended by it, but it's a reality that is about to figure into all of our politics, and I think that remains true.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that your analysis on the way this wedge issue has evolved, the targeting of trans people, particularly trans youth, as part of this, I think is really, really spot on. Because if we look last year, those over 140 bills, nearly every single one of them primarily targeted people who are trans, people who are non-binary, and particularly young people, which would mean probably some of the most vulnerable people in our community. So thank you for that, because I had been thinking about it, and there had to have been a twist, and I think you just identified it for me. So, when we talk about legislation, because we can list off bill numbers, we can list off the titles of those bills, it gets a little bit abstract, especially when you're looking at the volume of bad legislation that some people are facing in the states. A lot of people don't realize the damage a piece of legislation can do until it's a little bit too late and it's been signed into law and its effect. And yet you are seeing, because of the work that you do with Equality Florida, what the impact of even these debates is, even having to debate the humanity of people who are queer, for example. So what are you seeing? What is the toll that the introduction and the constant debate of these bills are taking on people in the state, particularly young people and people of color who have fewer, less access to some resources for support?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we've learned in this movement is the importance of being out, right? When you come out, you sort of put, you expose the lie of who they say we are by being who we actually are. And so I think it's not an accident that they target trans youth in particular. They're very, not just trans youth, but trans youth athletes. A subgroup of a subgroup of a subgroup, to the point where they can say anything they want, largely because most people have had no interaction that they're aware of with a trans young person who's an athlete. And so I think our work is not to allow them to dehumanize and erase, and instead do the opposite. Point the cameras and put the microphone in the hands of people so they can tell their own stories. And so we've been calling this the year of storytelling, and we've been working closely with a lot of different organizations, including PFLAG, to say, how do we lift up these voices and become an amplifier, not a replacement for people being able to speak for themselves. And I think that's that's part of the challenge. But I also think that we have to take quite seriously. I had said in other places, and I'm glad that there are different organizations and foundations that have taken up the challenge. We have to be as aggressive in responding to this attack on trans young people, both in terms of sports, access to medical care, as we are when it comes to the Equality Act, because we are talking about removing a lifeline from a population that has been bearing the brunt of discrimination. And, so in Florida, where we have on multiple occasions led the nation in murders of Black and brown trans women, and we have a legislature that doesn't say a word about it, won't take any step to protect, we can't take them seriously when they say anything that they are introducing is about, the safety of Floridians. So I think we've got a lot of, we're going to have to go through the process of people coming out, families coming out, friends and coworkers, and most importantly, amplifying the voices of people who they would prefer you think of only as caricatures.
Yeah. And when we started this conversation, you acknowledged right in the beginning, this is not just about Florida. These things do not happen in a vacuum. You've seen the patterns, I've seen the patterns, and they have been, unfortunately, fairly long in coming. So what are you seeing as you compare and look at Florida in comparison to what we're seeing in the other states? And do you think this is all connected? I mean, we've acknowledged that there are certain groups being targeted. So anything having to do with critical race theory is being challenged. Any books that even suggest that America is not perfect is being challenged.
Right.
what are you seeing as you look at this across the country, and what do you think this largely means for the LGBTQ movement?
Well, we stay in close contact with all, our sibling organizations in other states, and we see the exact same cookie cutter legislation being introduced. We know that it's being, sort of a template that right-wing think tanks, whether it's Heritage Foundation or other far-right organizations, are pushing. When last year when they were pushing the trans sports ban, we said, where is there any issue in the state of Florida? Where has something occurred that has prompted this? And they just hem and haw and stumble over their words, because it's not emerging from what's actually happening. There are policies in place for more than a decade, ensuring fairness and access to sports for all students. And so what their strategy is to appeal to that fear that society is changing, that the demographics are changing, and that therefore something is being taken from you. And the only way to stop it is to put people back in their place. And for us, that means they want us to not exist. And if we exist, they want us to hide. And if we don't hide successfully, any harm that comes to us is our fault. That is their narrative. And so it is a delusional way of moving through the world. And so we are going to have to, for us, it really has to be not accepting the normalization of what is unacceptable. So yes, it is a cookie cutter strategy unfolding state by state by state. And the reason I say what's happening in Florida is everybody's concern is there will be a presidential election. The contenders, the top two contenders for the nomination are these Floridians who are shaping the legislative strategy unfolding in our state. And to the degree that they are successful, if it's not in your backyard now, it will be. And when I mentioned the Stop Woke Act, this is a bill that would cause any company doing business in the state of Florida to be vulnerable to lawsuits from any employee disgruntled or offended by anti-bias training, offended by diversity, equity, and inclusion training. And so that means if every company's doing business, any company of any size is doing business in Florida. And so when I say it's coming to a legislature near you, we can fight this in a whack-a-mole fashion, one state at a time, where we can understand what connects all of them. And I think that wherever you are, make sure the companies in your community understand what's at stake here. And it's important for us to name the kind of authoritarian legislation that DeSantis is behind. This is about censoring books. We're already seeing books being yanked off of the bookshelves in schools and in libraries across our state, primarily Black and LGBTQ authors. And we can't just treat that like the frog being slowly boiled, where that alone doesn't cause me to march. Oh, this next thing alone doesn't cause me to march. We have to push back on it at every turn.
I was watching the news last night, and of course they were talking about Florida. There was some coverage of this past weekend, the appearance of Neonazis in the Orlando area. And the violence that ensued. There actually was a man who was attacked at a stoplight when these neo-Nazis saw that he happened to have a Jewish star on his, Star of David on his car. Reports like this are genuinely frightening. They're particularly frightening when political leaders will not call them out as what they are, which is neo-Nazis on the side of the road. But do you feel that overall the tenor of this whole debate is getting scarier and more aggressively violent? Or do you think these are kind of isolated incidents? Or is this something you expect to see in other places too?
Oh, this is the strategy. These are not isolated. I mean, you created the governor and Trump and the Republican Party in particular has created an atmosphere where Nazis feel quite comfortable demonstrating in public and feel empowered to attack people. And it's not an accident that the governor simply didn't do what, fortunately, a number of his Republican colleagues did, denounce Nazis because it figures into his math. It figures into his electoral math. He had any number of opportunities, but instead his spokesperson turned it into I think they were Democrats in disguise. Yeah. I'm not going to play your game, which was everything except Nazis have no place in our streets, no place in our country, no place in our politics. It's a very simple one. It's the easiest thing that you ought to be able to respond to as a human being, let alone as a politician. And he didn't respond, not because he's not smart. It's because he intentionally does not want to alienate the people who think that way, are adjacent to the people that think that way. He in no way wants to alienate even one vote that he thinks would fall back to Trump.
Wow. We finally got to a point where we're talking about ways to preserve your Nazi voting base. That is a genuinely horrifying place to be. Speaking of the horror, people are upset. People are really, I think in many ways feeling disempowered in some regards, because this is just all so big and it all seems to be coming through all the time. PFLAG, you've known us for a very long time. What would you tell people that they should be doing right now, whether they're in Florida or regardless of where they are? What are those things that our everyday activists and advocates should be doing right now so they are not the frogs slowly boiling?
Well, I mean, I think what we have to do is not allow ourselves the luxury of being tired, not allow ourselves the luxury of behaving as though it's optional if we respond. It's like we defy them at every turn, all the time, whether it's in the streets. I think the young man who got attacked, I think was a university student who went there to challenge them. And, good for him. I think we ought to pay off his college loan if he has one. I mean, I think our job is to never normalize this what is unacceptable. And so I love the bookstore owner who is pledged to mail a copy of Maus to anybody in that Tennessee school district where the book has been banned. These are the acts of resistance, and I think one of the most important ones is that we tell our stories. That it not really just be about responding angrily to them directly, but about telling our own stories so that their voice doesn't define us. So I would also say, wherever you are, there's a state LGBTQ organization, most likely in Florida, it's Equality Florida, that needs you right now. We have a lobby day coming up in Tallahassee, but we all, in person, but we also have a virtual lobby day. And I would encourage folks, if you live in Florida, if you were going to eventually retire to Florida, if you have family in Florida, if you have a business that enters into the territory of Florida, then join us, because we are at the front line of the DeSantis presidential ambition tour, which this legislation is a big part of. But that tour will be coming to your backyard, and it's better for people to understand who he is. The censorship and surveillance and control agenda that he is inflicting on Florida is the path that he will pursue should he make it to the White House.
We actually had a question from somebody who was watching, Nadine, because Liz noted that we have a lot of people saying, what should we be doing? I really wanted to look at this question. So somebody had asked, is there anything I can do as a high school teacher to support our LGBTQ students that won't make me in danger of getting fired? Because this is real. Any advice for Melissa?
Well, I would say, Melissa, there's a lot of things that you can do right now. And I don't know if you're in Florida, but if you are, I'll put my email is easy, Nadine@equalityflorida.org, and our website, equalityflorida.org, that's been scrolling, or eqfl.org, that's been scrolling at the bottom, is a good way to get in touch with us. But, one of the biggest programs we have right now is Safe and Healthy Schools. And it's not just about addressing bullying. Harm reduction is fine, but it's not the goal. The goal is an environment where every student can thrive, LGBTQ students included. And that program is going strong. I mean, yes, in the face of headwinds, there's still the ability to be there for students, the importance more than ever to be there for students, to affirm their existence, to affirm their families, and to not allow them to feel as isolated as the legislature wants them to be. But it's also important, whatever organization you are a part of, your company, what is your company doing to walk the talk that it uses during its diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings? How are they showing up right now? tell your stories. You don't have to have a fancy camera. We all walk around with these, amazing machines that let us record our stories. Become a storyteller, lift up the voices of people who aren't being heard. The organizations that you're a part of, ask them what their strategy is to protect trans youth right now when they are bearing the brunt of so many of these legislative attacks, and push them. If you don't think what they're doing is adequate, push them to do more, and then resource them to do more. There are many, many things that you can do, but my greatest fear, you said it, is people are going, oh, it's so disheartening. It feels like we're moving backwards, and I just want to check out. Well, there's folks who don't have the opportunity to check out. Checking out is not on the table because they are in the crosshairs of the Republican political machinery, and so we gotta show up.
Yeah, I think it's a timely message. I will admit that last night watching the news, I was extremely, extremely upset, and I found myself saying I didn't think we could go back this far, this fast. It just feels like it's unraveling at a pretty record speed, and I've been doing this a long time. But I think don't normalize what's happening, contribute to organizations doing the work, tell your story. If you are queer and you can be out if it's safe, please come out. They can hate us if they know us. And ask what your organizations are doing. I really love that advice, Nadine, because our organizations, whether it is our schools, our religious institutions, our employers, all have a lot of power vocally and financially. And I think that is such a great thing. We saw this strategy work in a lot of other states on other issues. So thank you for elevating that. And Nadine, thank you so much for being here. You are so busy and there's so much going on. I really, really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. I appreciate being invited. And the one thing I would tell everybody to do, in addition to working with their state orgs, go to your school board meetings. That's where they are targeting us the most. And they often will import people who don't even have any stake at all in your local school board just to drive up the numbers. But go there and stand up for the school board members who are doing the right thing, and make sure that they see not just the extremists who will, go there on a Thursday night when I don't even know it's on television, but show up at school board meetings every chance you get, because that is the number one target that they are going after as part of their state by state and local strategy for Republican electoral victories.
Yeah, thank you. It is true. It's been a long-term strategy, and everything's coming to fruition now. Nadine, thank you so much. Please come back, because we would love to tell people about what you are doing and what Equality Florida is doing. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Bye, Nadine. All right. That was a lot. That was definitely a lot. And I will admit that I have been kind of in the dumps, more than in the dumps, frankly, really, really depressed, because what is happening around us is frightening and depressing and disheartening, and a reminder of how difficult things can get when people who don't have good intentions are leading the way. So we want to put people back in control, because this is a time where a lot of us feel like we don't have control. And so I want to tell you about something really exciting happening at PFLAG today. And this is the first time we're talking about it. So I technically have a little scoop, if there's such a thing on a show like this. So anyone who knows PFLAG knows that we really believe in leading with love. That is a phrase you hear PFLAGers use all the time. And now we are going to ask you to help us do the same. We're going to try to address some of those people out there who want to remove books from public places simply because those books celebrate the wonderful diversity of the world and remind us of things like the histories of LGBTQ people and people of color and all different kinds of diverse figures. And so to that end, we want to ask you today to join PFLAG in our collective effort to read with love. Yes, you heard that. That is Read with Love, and that is the logo, and I am so excited about it. My head may explode on camera, which is why you can't see me right now. So what we want you to do is to visit pflag.org/readwithlove. Giant exploding head today, and that is pflag.org/readwithlove, and find out ways to join this proactive effort. So for my commitment is that every single week on this show, I'm going to share a book that I'm enjoying and encourage you to do the same. And then if you are able to, we would love you to head to one of our wish lists, buy a book and donate it to your local library. We're also going to ask you to go onto social media, share your photos of you doing this really, really important life-changing work. Use the hashtag #ReadWithLove. And let us know what you are doing, because together we can make this a place that includes everybody, a place where we're all able to be free and thrive and celebrate our identity. So go out and get things like Kate Bornstein's Hello Cruel World, or maybe you want to have it read Fun Home. It's time for you to read Fun Home if you haven't. Or maybe if you have kids, you want to read my favorite little book, which is This Day in June, which explains pride parades. All of these books are under fire. All of these books are great. And all these books would really be super at your local library, and you could be the person who puts them there. So please join PFLAG in Reading with Love. We're going to talk about this a lot more. This is how we change the world. So I have to wrap up. I'm over time as usual. We leave you the same way every single week, reminding you to run fast, laugh hard, and be kind. And please, please, please go get vaccinated, go get boosted, wear the right mask, be respectful. We want to see each other really soon. My name is Jean Marie Navetta. If you need help before next week, go to pflag.org/find to locate your local chapter. Until then, we will see you again next week on Something to Talk About Live. Bye, everybody.